My nurse spent the entire shift explaining why our head surgeon was incompetent. I am the head surgeon. The syringe slipped from my hands, clattering onto the hospital floor as Nurse Patricia Velasco's voice cut through the ICU like a scalpel. Dr. Thorne nearly killed another patient today, third one this month. She was speaking to the new resident, Dr. James Park, who nodded grimly while checking charts. I bent to retrieve the fallen syringe, my hands shaking not from exhaustion, but from rage. They had no idea that Dr. Alexander Thorne was standing 3 feet away, wearing scrubs with a name tag that read, Michael Santos, RN. 6 months ago, I had faked my own professional death to infiltrate Metropolitan General Hospital. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Create a malpractice scandal, disappear from public view, then return as a traveling nurse to document the systematic negligence that was destroying patients' lives. What I hadn't expected was hearing my colleagues celebrate my supposed incompetence while real people died from the corruption I was trying to expose. Mrs. Delacroix in room 314 was bleeding internally because someone had sold substandard surgical equipment to the hospital. The blood on my hands was literally and figuratively mine. Patricia continued her lecture, her voice dripping with professional disgust. Thorne's technique is sloppy, his judgment is questionable, and honestly, I think he's been drinking during surgeries. The man's hands shake like autumn leaves. She demonstrated with an exaggerated tremor, making Dr. Park chuckle nervously. I felt my jaw clench involuntarily because Patricia had been my head nurse for 8 years. She had assisted me through over 2,000 successful surgeries, had once told me I was the most skilled surgeon she'd ever worked with. Now she was destroying my reputation to cover for the hospital's deadly cost-cutting measures. The irony burned deeper than any scalpel wound. I was indeed responsible for Mrs. Delacroix's condition, but not because of incompetence or alcoholism. I had been forced to operate with faulty instruments purchased through the hospital's new procurement contract with Zenith Medical Supply, a company owned by board chairman William Preston's nephew. The hemostatic clamps had failed during surgery, causing massive hemorrhaging that took 4 hours to control. My surgical report, filed under my real identity 6 months ago, had documented the equipment failure in detail, but that report had vanished from hospital records, replaced with a narrative of surgical error. Patricia moved closer to Dr. Park, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Between you and me, I think someone needs to report Thorne to the medical board. The man is a danger to every patient who comes through those OR doors. She glanced around the ICU, her eyes passing right over me as if I were invisible furniture. I've been documenting incidents for months. Wrong medications, botched procedures, post-operative complications that should never happen. The pattern is clear. Dr. Park shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his watch. Have you spoken to Chief of Staff Morrison about this? Surely if there's evidence of malpractice... Patricia cut him off with a bitter laugh that made my blood run cold. Morrison? He's the one protecting Thorne. They golf together every Sunday at Pinehurst Country Club. You think he's going to investigate his drinking buddy? She pulled out her phone and scrolled through what looked like photos. Look at these surgical site infections. 7 cases in the last month, all Thorne's patients. My heart hammered against my ribs as I recognized the photos. Those were my patients, people I had desperately tried to save despite being given contaminated surgical supplies. The infection rate had skyrocketed because Zenith Medical's sterilization protocols were virtually non-existent. I had discovered this 3 days before my supposed malpractice scandal broke. I had been preparing to expose the entire conspiracy when someone leaked false allegations about my performance to the state medical board. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. A coded announcement crackled over the hospital intercom. Code Blue, room 408. Code Blue, room 408. Patricia immediately pocketed her phone and hurried toward the elevator, leaving Dr. Park and me alone in the ICU corridor. I watched her disappear behind the closing elevator doors, then pulled out my own phone to check the patient roster. Room 408 was occupied by Thomas Fitzgerald, a 62-year-old man who had undergone cardiac bypass surgery 5 days ago. The surgery I had performed under my real identity, using equipment I now knew was defective. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my nursing badge bouncing against my chest as I climbed 4 flights. By the time I reached the cardiac unit, a crowd of medical personnel had gathered around Mr. Fitzgerald's room. Through the doorway, I could see Dr. Harrison Ellis, the interim head of cardiothoracic surgery, working frantically over the patient. Ellis was a competent surgeon, but he lacked the specialized experience needed for the complications that Zenith's faulty equipment could cause. Pushing through the crowd, I positioned myself where I could observe the resuscitation efforts. Mr. Fitzgerald's monitors showed ventricular fibrillation, a deadly heart rhythm that could be caused by several factors. But given the pattern I'd been tracking, I suspected his bypass grafts had failed due to substandard suture material. The synthetic grafts Zenith supplied had a tendency to deteriorate rapidly, causing exactly this type of emergency. Dr. Ellis charged the defibrillator paddles, his face grim with concentration. Clear! The electrical shock jolted Mr. Fitzgerald's body, but his heart rhythm remained chaotic. Ellis tried again, then again, each attempt growing more desperate. I wanted to step forward, to tell him about the graft failure pattern I'd discovered, but revealing my knowledge would expose my true identity. Instead, I watched helplessly as a patient died from corruption. I was powerless to stop. Patricia appeared at my elbow, breathing heavily from her rush upstairs. "Another one of Thorne's butcher jobs," she whispered, loud enough for several nearby staff members to hear. That poor man never had a chance once Thorne got his hands on him. Her words were like acid poured into an open wound. Mr. Fitzgerald had been one of my most challenging cases, a patient with severe coronary artery disease who needed surgery to survive. I had spent 6 hours meticulously crafting his bypass grafts, only to have them fail because of defective materials. The resuscitation efforts continued for 20 more minutes before Dr. Ellis finally called time of death. As the medical team dispersed, I noticed Chief of Staff Dr. Robert Morrison standing in the hallway, his expression unreadable. He was a tall, silver-haired man in his late 50s, someone I had once considered a mentor and friend. Now I wondered how deep his involvement in the conspiracy went. Was he merely protecting a golfing partner, as Patricia suggested? Or was he actively covering up the procurement scandal? Morrison approached Patricia, placing a paternal hand on her shoulder. "This is tragic, but we can't let emotion cloud our judgment. Dr. Thorne is still on administrative leave pending the investigation. These complications could have happened to any surgeon." His words were carefully measured, designed to sound supportive while actually deflecting blame. Patricia nodded, but I could see the frustration in her eyes. She genuinely believed she was protecting patients by documenting my supposed failures. Later that evening, I sat in my small apartment, staring at the wall covered with documents, photos, and timelines, mapping the corruption at Metropolitan General. Red string connected procurement contracts to patient deaths, creating a web that led directly to William Preston and his network of cronies. But gathering evidence as a nurse was proving nearly impossible. I needed access to surgical records, board meeting minutes, and financial documents that were locked away in administrative offices. My laptop chimed with an encrypted message from my contact at the FBI, Agent Sarah Dunn. "Package delivered tomorrow, Aero 800. Be ready." The package was a sophisticated recording device disguised as a standard hospital pager, technology that would allow me to document conversations without detection. Agent Dunn had been investigating healthcare fraud for 15 years, and she assured me that what I was uncovering could bring down an entire network of corrupt officials. The next morning, I clipped the recording pager to my scrubs and headed to the hospital for what I hoped would be my last shift as Michael Santos. The device was so realistic that even I forgot it wasn't a real pager until it didn't buzz when the actual pagers went off. My plan was simple: get Patricia talking about Dr. Thorne's supposed incompetence, then gradually steer the conversation toward the real causes of patient deaths. If I could get her to admit knowledge of the equipment problems, it would provide crucial evidence for the FBI investigation. I found Patricia in the break room, sipping coffee and reviewing patient charts. "Rough night?" I asked, settling into the chair across from her. She looked up with tired eyes, nodding grimly. 3 post-operative complications in the cardiac unit, all Thorne's patients from last week. I'm starting to think that man shouldn't be allowed near a scalpel. Her voice carried genuine concern, which made my deception feel even more manipulative. Patricia was a dedicated nurse who truly cared about patient safety. She was destroying my reputation not out of malice, but from a misguided belief that she was protecting people. "What kind of complications?" I pressed, activating the recording device with a subtle gesture. Patricia leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Graft failures, mostly. The bypass patients are coming back with complete blockages within days of surgery. It's almost like the grafts are dissolving." Her description was medically accurate, which surprised me. Patricia understood the technical aspects of the failures, which meant she might also understand their true cause. I decided to take a calculated risk. Could it be the equipment? I've noticed some of the surgical supplies look different lately. Cheaper packaging, unfamiliar brand names. Patricia's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "What are you implying?" Her tone carried a warning, suggesting I was approaching dangerous territory. "Nothing specific." I backtracked quickly, just wondering if there might be quality control issues. Patricia studied my face for a long moment before responding. "Quality control isn't the nurse's responsibility. We use whatever the hospital purchases, and we document outcomes. If there are patterns of failure, it's up to the medical staff to investigate." Her answer was technically correct but evasive. She was deflecting responsibility while avoiding any direct discussion of equipment problems. This suggested she knew more than she was admitting. The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Ellis entering the break room, his scrubs stained with blood and his face etched with exhaustion. "Patricia, I need the surgical notes from the Fitzgerald case. Morrison wants a complete review of the procedure." Patricia immediately stood, her demeanor becoming professional and distant. "Of course, doctor. I'll pull the files immediately." She gathered her charts and hurried out, leaving me alone with Ellis. Dr. Ellis poured himself coffee with shaking hands. "This job is killing me," he muttered, more to himself than to me. 3 surgical failures in 1 week. I'm starting to question everything I learned in medical school. I saw an opportunity to gather information from a different angle. "What kind of failures?" Ellis looked at me with surprise, apparently not expecting a nurse to ask detailed medical questions. "Graft deterioration, suture line breakdown, post-operative bleeding that shouldn't happen with modern materials." He sat down heavily, rubbing his temples. "The worst part is, These were textbook surgeries. Perfect technique, optimal conditions, experienced surgical teams. But the results are catastrophic. His frustration was genuine, which told me he wasn't part of the conspiracy. Ellis was another victim, a skilled surgeon whose reputation was being destroyed by substandard equipment. I made a decision that would either advance my investigation or end it completely. Doctor, have you noticed any changes in the surgical supplies? Different manufacturers? Altered specifications? Ellis looked at me sharply, his exhaustion replaced by sudden alertness. Why would you ask that? I kept my voice steady, professional. I've been working in different hospitals as a traveling nurse. Sometimes supply chain changes affect patient outcomes in ways that aren't immediately obvious. Ellis stared at me for a long moment, clearly debating whether to trust a nurse with sensitive information. Finally, he pulled out his phone and showed me a photo of a surgical clamp. This is supposed to be a Jameson hemostatic clamp, manufactured by Precision Instruments. But look at the serial number. He zoomed in on tiny markings that were barely visible. That's not Precision's numbering system. These are counterfeit instruments, probably made in some overseas factory with no quality control. My heart raced as I realized the implications. This wasn't just about substandard equipment. It was about counterfeit medical devices that could kill patients. Have you reported this to Morrison? Ellis's expression darkened. I tried. He said I was being paranoid, that the hospital's procurement department thoroughly vets all suppliers. When I pressed the issue, he suggested I might be experiencing burnout and should consider taking some time off. The pattern was becoming clear. Morrison wasn't just protecting a friend. He was actively suppressing evidence of a criminal conspiracy. Any medical professional who questioned the equipment quality was marginalized, discredited, or removed from their position. My own departure had been orchestrated to eliminate the hospital's most experienced surgeon, someone who would inevitably discover the truth. Ellis leaned closer, lowering his voice to barely above a whisper. There's something else you should know. I've been tracking the procurement contracts, trying to understand how these counterfeit instruments got into our supply chain. Every purchase order for the last 18 months has been approved by the same person. He paused, checking the break room door to ensure we weren't overheard. Patricia Velasco has been signing off on medical equipment purchases. She's not just a nurse documenting surgical failures. She's the one authorizing the purchase of counterfeit instruments. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Patricia wasn't just destroying my reputation out of misguided concern for patient safety. She was actively participating in the conspiracy, purchasing counterfeit equipment, and then blaming the resulting deaths on surgical incompetence. Her passionate denunciations of Dr. R. Thorne weren't motivated by professional integrity. They were calculated deflection designed to hide her own criminal activity. My recording device had captured Ellis's accusations, but I needed more evidence before involving the FBI. Confronting Patricia directly would be dangerous, potentially exposing my true identity and destroying months of careful investigation. Instead, I decided to access the procurement records Ellis had mentioned, using my nursing credentials to search areas where Michael Santos would normally have legitimate business. That evening, I used my hospital ID to enter the administrative wing, claiming I needed to update patient supply inventories for the night shift. The procurement office was locked, but my investigation had taught me that hospitals were remarkably lax about internal security. Using skills learned from Agent Dunn, I bypassed the simple lock mechanism and gained access to filing cabinets containing purchase orders dating back 2 years. The documents told a damning story. Patricia had systematically replaced legitimate medical equipment with counterfeit alternatives, pocketing the difference between the authorized purchase amounts and the actual costs of fake instruments. The profit margins were enormous. A genuine Jameson clamp cost $200, while the counterfeit version cost $15. Multiplied across hundreds of instruments and dozens of procedures, Patricia had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars while putting patients at deadly risk. More disturbing was the pattern of her activity. Patricia had begun purchasing counterfeit equipment shortly after William Preston joined the hospital board. The timing suggested coordination between Patricia's fraud and Preston's nephew's supply company. This wasn't just individual corruption, it was organized crime with tentacles reaching into the highest levels of hospital administration. As I photographed documents with my phone, I heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Quickly closing the filing cabinets, I gathered some legitimate supply inventory sheets and prepared a cover story for my presence in the administrative wing. The footsteps passed by, but the close call reminded me how dangerous this investigation had become. If Patricia discovered my true identity, both my life and the FBI case would be in jeopardy. The next morning, I arrived at work early and positioned myself in the supply room where Patricia typically checked equipment inventories. When she entered 30 minutes later, I was counting surgical instruments and making notes on a clipboard. "Morning, Patricia. Inventory discrepancies again. We're short on hemostatic clamps." She froze momentarily, then recovered her composure. "Supply chain issues. Zenith Medical is having production delays." Her explanation was plausible, but I detected nervousness in her voice. "Strange coincidence," I continued. "The cardiac unit is reporting unusual failure rates with hemostatic instruments, almost like they're not meeting manufacturing specifications." Patricia's face flushed slightly, confirming my suspicions. "Equipment failures happen. That's why we document everything for quality assurance." I decided to push harder. "The FBI is investigating healthcare fraud in this region. Counterfeit medical devices, specifically. Have you heard anything about that? Patricia went completely pale, gripping the doorframe for support. Where did you hear that? Her reaction was so extreme that I immediately regretted the question. I had revealed too much knowledge, arousing suspicions that could compromise everything. Hospital gossip, I said quickly. You know how rumors spread. But Patricia wasn't buying it. She studied my face with new intensity, clearly trying to remember where she might have seen me before. After 8 years of working together, some subconscious recognition might be breaking through despite my altered appearance and false identity. I need to check on patients, she said abruptly, hurrying out of the supply room. Within hours, word spread through the hospital that Patricia had requested an immediate meeting with Chief of Staff Morrison. Whatever they discussed lasted over an hour, and when Patricia emerged from Morrison's office, she looked shaken and angry. I realized my investigation had reached a critical juncture. Either I moved quickly to gather final evidence, or the conspiracy would eliminate me, just as it had eliminated Dr. Alexander Thorne. That evening, Agent Dunn called with urgent news. We've intercepted communications suggesting your cover is blown. Patricia Velasco ran facial recognition software on hospital security footage, trying to match your current appearance to employee databases. She hasn't confirmed your identity yet, but she's getting close. The FBI was prepared to move immediately, but they needed one more piece of evidence. Direct proof of Patricia's knowledge that the instruments were counterfeit. The next morning, I made a desperate gambit. During shift change, when the ICU was busy and chaotic, I approached Patricia with what appeared to be urgent medical information. We need to talk privately. I found something in Mrs. Delacroix's surgical notes that could be important. Patricia looked skeptical, but patient safety concerns overrode her suspicions. We stepped into an empty conference room, where I activated my recording device. I've been reviewing the post-operative complications, I began, and I think there might be a pattern related to specific instruments. Patricia's expression hardened. What kind of pattern? I pulled out photos Ellis had shown me, images of the counterfeit clamps with their suspicious serial numbers. These instruments aren't what they appear to be. The markings suggest they're manufactured outside normal quality control standards. Patricia stared at the photos for several seconds before responding. You're very observant for a traveling nurse, almost like you have surgical experience. Her voice carried unmistakable menace. Who are you really, Michael Santos? Because I don't think that's your real name. The confrontation I had hoped to avoid was happening, but my recording device was capturing every word. I'm someone who cares about patient safety, I replied, keeping my voice steady. These counterfeit instruments are killing people, and you know it. Patricia laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Counterfeit? That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof these instruments aren't legitimate? She was challenging me to reveal how much I knew, trying to determine if I was working alone or with law enforcement. I have proof you've been purchasing instruments from unauthorized suppliers, I said, playing my final card. Purchase orders signed by you for equipment that costs a fraction of the authorized amounts. Money that's been diverted to personal accounts. Patricia's facade finally cracked completely. You have no idea what you're dealing with. This goes way beyond one nurse trying to make extra money. There are people involved who will kill to protect their interests. Her admission was exactly what Agent Dunn needed, but it also confirmed my worst fears about the danger I was facing. People like William Preston? I asked, hoping to get more specific information on record. Patricia's eyes widened with genuine fear. How do you know that name? Nobody knows about Preston's involvement except... She trailed off, studying my face with new recognition. Oh my God, you're Alexander Thorne. The moment I had dreaded for 6 months had finally arrived. My cover was blown, and Patricia now knew she was talking to the man whose reputation she had spent months destroying. Hello, Patricia, I said, dropping the pretense. We need to talk about what really happened to my patients. Her face cycled through shock, fear, and anger before settling on cold calculation. You're supposed to be discredited, possibly dead. Preston isn't going to be happy that you're still investigating. Preston ordered my elimination? The recording device captured my question, and Patricia's nod of confirmation. The malpractice scandal was fabricated to remove you from the hospital before you could expose the procurement fraud. When that didn't work, they planned something more permanent. You disappearing and taking on a false identity actually saved your life. Her revelation explained the timing of my supposed scandal and confirmed that my investigation had threatened powerful people. Patricia pulled out her phone, apparently planning to alert her conspirators that Dr. Alexander Thorne was alive and actively investigating. But before she could dial, FBI agents burst through the conference room door, led by Agent Dunn. Patricia Velasco, you're under arrest for healthcare fraud, conspiracy, and accessory to multiple homicides. The recording device had been transmitting live to the FBI, allowing them to coordinate the arrest with perfect timing. As Patricia was led away in handcuffs, she turned back to me with pure hatred in her eyes. This isn't over, Thorne. Preston has resources you can't imagine. He'll find another way to destroy you. Her threats were meaningless now, but they reminded me that dismantling the conspiracy would require exposing everyone involved, not just the immediate participants. Agent Dunn approached as the other agents processed the crime scene. We've simultaneously arrested William Preston, 3 members of the hospital board, and the owner of Zenith Medical Supply. Your investigation provided evidence for the largest healthcare fraud case in state history. The scope of the arrests was gratifying, but I thought about all the patients who had died while I gathered evidence. Justice was important, but it couldn't resurrect Mr. Fitzgerald or heal Mrs. Delacroix. 6 months later, I stood in the same ICU where Patricia had first destroyed my reputation, but now I wore scrubs with my real name embroidered above the pocket. Dr. Alexander Thorne had been officially reinstated as head of surgery after all charges were dropped and the conspiracy was exposed. The hospital had undergone complete leadership changes, with new administrators committed to transparency and patient safety. Patricia and her co-conspirators were serving federal prison sentences, their medical licenses permanently revoked. The irony was bittersweet. I had to destroy my professional identity to save it, sacrificing 6 months of my life to expose the people who were literally killing patients for profit. But standing in the ICU where Patricia had called me incompetent, watching monitors that showed stable vital signs because we now used legitimate equipment, I knew the sacrifice had been worthwhile. The patients we saved in the future would never know their lives depended on a surgeon who once pretended to be a nurse, listening to his own reputation being destroyed one shift at a time.